When racist teachers mocked a bright black student in front of his peers, they thought they'd broken his spirit, but they never expected his resilience or the powerful response from his determined family. What unfolded next turned the tables in a way no one saw coming. The day began like any other at Riverview High School, a place where the walls seemed to carry whispers of generational prejudice. For Jamal Thompson, a bright and ambitious black student, school was a sanctuary for learning and dreaming beyond the confines of his small, racially divided town. But that morning, something was different. The air was thick with unease as Jamal walked into his homeroom, his books clutched tightly against his chest. From the moment Jamal entered the classroom, he felt the stares. Whispers exchanged between a few of the teachers gathered at the front made him pause. Ms. Carter, the head of the department, gave him a look he couldn't quite place, a mixture of condescension and amusement. Jamal took his seat quietly, hoping the uneasy feeling would pass. It didn't. The day spiraled into a nightmare during his history class. The lesson was about great inventors, a topic Jamal was particularly passionate about. As he raised his hand to answer a question, Mr. Hayes, the teacher, smirked before calling on him. "All right, Jamal, let's hear your theory," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Jamal began to explain, articulating his point about the contributions of black inventors throughout history. But halfway through his explanation, a stifled laugh broke the flow. It wasn't coming from a student. It was from Ms. Carter, who had joined the class as an observer that day. Soon Mr. Hayes joined in, their quiet laughter growing louder as Jamal faltered mid-sentence. "What's so funny?" Jamal asked, his voice steady despite the humiliation bubbling inside him. "Oh, nothing," Ms. Carter replied, waving her hand dismissively. "It's just interesting." The class fell silent, the other students exchanging uncomfortable glances. Jamal's cheeks burned, but he refused to shrink under their ridicule. "If there's something wrong with my answer, you can correct me," he said, his voice firm. "But laughing at me isn't teaching." The room tensed. Ms. Carter's smile faded, replaced by a cold stare. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "All right, back to the lesson," he muttered, avoiding eye contact with Jamal. But the damage was done. The laughter lingered in Jamal's mind like an echo, making the rest of the day unbearable. Each hallway he walked through felt narrower. Each glance from a teacher or student felt heavier. At lunch, Jamal confided in his best friend, Malik. "I don't get it, man. Why do they treat me like this? I'm just trying to learn, just like everyone else." Malik sighed, shaking his head. "You're not just anyone, Jamal. You're smart, you're driven, and that scares them. They don't want you to outshine them." Jamal nodded, but the words did little to ease the ache in his chest. That evening, as he sat at the dinner table with his parents, he hesitated before bringing up the incident. But his mother, an advocate for justice and equality, noticed his quiet demeanor. "Jamal, what's wrong?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Jamal recounted the events, his voice trembling with frustration. His father, a respected lawyer in their community, listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. "This isn't right," his father said firmly. "No one has the right to demean you like that, especially not your teachers." By the end of the conversation, a plan was forming. Jamal's parents decided to address the matter directly, starting with the school administration. But Jamal had his own idea brewing. He wasn't just going to stand up for himself, he was going to make sure no other student had to endure the same treatment. The next morning, Jamal walked into Riverview High School with a renewed sense of purpose. His father had coached him the night before, reminding him of his rights and encouraging him to stand tall in the face of adversity. Jamal wasn't just going to let this slide. He was going to demand respect, not just for himself, but for all students who had ever felt marginalized. In homeroom, whispers followed him like a shadow. The events of the previous day had spread, and it seemed everyone was waiting to see how Jamal would respond. Some students looked at him with pity, others with admiration, but Jamal kept his head high and his focus sharp. By mid-morning, Jamal found himself in the principal's office. His father, Mr. Thompson, had already arrived, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying an air of authority that couldn't be ignored. Principal Reed, a middle-aged man with a perpetually weary expression, sat across from them, his fingers steepled. "Mr. Thompson, Jamal," Principal Reed began, his tone diplomatic. "I understand there's been an issue with some of our staff." Jamal looked at his father, who gave him a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, Jamal recounted the incident with Miss Carter and Mr. Hayes. He described the laughter, the condescension, and how it made him feel singled out and humiliated. His voice didn't waver. Even as the memory stirred emotions, he was determined to keep in check. Principal Reed's expression shifted between concern and discomfort. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," he said. "This is, of course, a very serious matter. I'll be sure to speak with the teachers involved and ensure it doesn't happen again." But Mr. Thompson wasn't satisfied with vague promises. "That's not enough," he said firmly. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about creating an environment where students, especially students of color, feel respected and valued. What happened to Jamal is indicative of a larger issue, and it needs to be addressed comprehensively." The principal shifted in his chair, clearly uneasy under the weight of Mr. Thompson's words. "I'll look into it thoroughly," he said, "and I'll make sure the staff undergoes sensitivity training." "That's a start," Mr. Thompson replied, "but we'll be following up." Outside the office, Jamal felt a mix of relief and apprehension. His father's unwavering support had given him strength, but he knew this was only the beginning. The principal's words were diplomatic, but Jamal wasn't sure they would translate into real change. That afternoon, Jamal made his way to the library, a sanctuary where he often found solace. There, he began drafting a letter to the school board. He outlined not just his experience, but the need for systemic changes within the school. His words flowed with clarity and purpose, fueled by his determination to turn his pain into progress. Meanwhile, Malik and a few other friends were rallying behind him. "We've got your back, Jamal," Malik said, as they brainstormed ways to support him. "If the school won't take this seriously, we'll make them listen." The group decided to organize a petition, calling for accountability and action. Within days, the petition gained traction, with dozens of students signing their names in solidarity. Social media played a pivotal role as Jamal's story spread beyond the school's walls, drawing attention from parents, alumni, and even local activists. Meanwhile, Malik and a few other friends were rallying behind him. "We've got your back, Jamal," Malik said as they brainstormed ways to support him. "If the school won't take this seriously, we'll make them listen." The group decided to organize a petition calling for accountability and action. Within days, the petition gained traction, with dozens of students signing their names in solidarity. Social media played a pivotal role as Jamal's story spread beyond the school's walls, drawing attention from parents, alumni, and even local activists. The story gained momentum faster than Jamal could have imagined. The local newspaper published a detailed article titled, "Racist Incident Sparks Outcry at Riverview High." The piece highlighted Jamal's experience and included quotes from students and parents who supported his call for change. The article painted a vivid picture of a school grappling with its own prejudices, and it didn't hold back on the accountability of the staff involved. As the story spread, so did the backlash. At school, Jamal felt the pressure intensify. Some teachers openly avoided him, while others, like Ms. Carter and Mr. Hayes, became more passive-aggressive in their treatment. They would call on him only to nitpick his answers or dismiss his valid points. Their hostility was thinly veiled, but Jamal held his ground. Each small jab only strengthened his resolve. Even some classmates began to distance themselves, worried about being associated with the growing controversy. But Jamal was not alone. Malik and a few close friends remained steadfast, their solidarity unwavering. Malik even took it upon himself to document everything, recording interactions, saving messages of support, and gathering testimonies from other students who had faced similar discrimination. At home, Jamal's parents were his strongest pillars of support. His father continued to guide him through the legal and procedural aspects, while his mother offered emotional strength, reminding him daily of his worth and the power of his voice. "This isn't just your fight, Jamal," she said one evening. "You're standing up for every student who's been made to feel less than. That takes courage." Jamal nodded, her words resonating deeply. But courage didn't make the nights any easier. There were moments when he felt the weight of it all, the stares, the whispers, the isolation. Yet, every time he doubted himself, he remembered the students who had come forward, inspired by his bravery to share their own experiences. The school administration, under mounting pressure, announced an internal investigation. Principal Reed held a faculty meeting, emphasizing the need for professionalism and impartiality. But for Jamal, the announcement felt hollow. The same teachers who had mocked him were still in their positions, and the culture of bias persisted. To make matters worse, Ms. Carter and Mr. Hayes began spreading their own narrative, painting Jamal as a troublemaker. "He's just seeking attention," Ms. Carter told a colleague, within earshot of a student who later relayed it to Jamal. The comment stung, but it didn't break him. Instead, Jamal doubled down. He started attending meetings with local activists, learning how to effectively advocate for change. These mentors encouraged him to use his voice not just to fight for himself, but to inspire systemic reform. The turning point came during a school assembly. The administration had invited a guest speaker to address the importance of inclusivity. While the gesture seemed like a step in the right direction, Jamal couldn't ignore the irony of sitting in the same room as the teachers who had humiliated him. As the speaker concluded, Jamal raised his hand. The room fell silent as he stood, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. "I appreciate the message," he began, his voice steady. "But words without action are just empty promises. What happened to me isn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a larger problem. If we want real change, we need accountability, transparency, and a commitment to equality." The room erupted in murmurs. Some students clapped hesitantly, while others stared in awe at Jamal's bravery. Ms. Carter and Mr. Hayes exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. Jamal sat down, his hands trembling under the desk. Malik leaned over, whispering, "That was powerful, man. You're making them listen." The assembly sparked further conversations among students and parents. Jamal's speech was shared on social media, amplifying his message far beyond Riverview High. As more people rallied behind him, the school administration could no longer ignore the issue. Principal Reed scheduled a meeting with Jamal, his parents, and the implicated teachers to address the situation directly. Jamal walked into that meeting knowing it would be a defining moment, not just for him, but for the fight against racism within the school. The meeting room was sterile and suffocating, its walls lined with certificates and plaques proclaiming Riverview High's commitment to excellence. Jamal, flanked by his parents, sat across from Principal Reed, Ms. Carter, and Mr. Hayes. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Principal Reed began, his tone attempting to strike a balance between authority and diplomacy. "We've gathered today to address the concerns raised by Jamal and his family. This is an opportunity for open dialogue and resolution." Ms. Carter leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed defensively. "I'd like to state up front that this entire situation has been blown out of proportion. My intentions have always been to encourage all my students to excel." Jamal's father leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Encouragement doesn't look like public humiliation, Ms. Carter. Laughing at a student while they're trying to participate isn't constructive. It's destructive. Jamal glanced at his mother, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, he addressed the room. "I don't understand why you treated me that way. I was just trying to share what I'd learned. But instead of correcting me if I was wrong, you laughed. Do you know how that felt?" For a brief moment, Ms. Carter looked taken aback. But before she could respond, Mr. Hayes interjected. "We were not laughing at you, Jamal. Sometimes teachers laugh at the way certain things are phrased. It's not personal." Jamal's frustration bubbled to the surface. It felt personal. And it wasn't just that moment. It's the little comments, the dismissive looks, the constant feeling that I'm being judged more harshly than others. The room fell silent as Jamal's words hung in the air. Principal Reed cleared his throat, his expression conflicted. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Hayes, can you see how your actions may have been perceived this way?" Ms. Carter shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps, but it wasn't our intention." Jamal's father spoke up. "Intent doesn't erase impact. Jamal is here because he wants to ensure that no other student has to feel the way he did. This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about accountability and change." The meeting continued, with both sides presenting their perspectives. But it was clear that Ms. Carter and Mr. Hayes were struggling to fully acknowledge the harm they had caused. Still, Principal Reed promised to implement mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all staff, as well as a more robust system for students to report incidents of discrimination. As the meeting concluded, Jamal stood and faced Ms. Carter and Mr. Hayes directly. "I don't hate you," he said, his voice steady, "but I hope you understand how your actions affected me, and I hope you'll think twice before treating another student the same way." For the first time, Ms. Carter seemed to soften. "I will reflect on this," she said quietly. Outside the meeting room, Jamal felt a wave of relief. His parents embraced him, their pride evident. "You handled that with grace," his mother said. "You stood up for yourself and others." Jamal nodded, a small smile forming. "It's not over, though. There's still work to do." That evening, Jamal sat down to draft another letter, this time addressed to the local community. He wanted to thank everyone who had supported him and encourage them to continue advocating for equality and fairness. His story had sparked a movement within the school, but he knew it could extend far beyond its walls. As he typed, Malik called, "Hey man, I just wanted to say, you're a legend. What you're doing, it's inspiring." Jamal chuckled. "Thanks, Malik. But this isn't just about me, it's about all of us." Malik's voice was filled with conviction. "Then let's keep fighting." The days following the meeting marked a shift at Riverview High School. Word spread quickly about Jamal's confrontation with the teachers and the administration. Students, parents, and even some faculty began to rally behind him, recognizing that his bravery had initiated a conversation that had been avoided for far too long. The school implemented immediate changes. Sensitivity training for staff became mandatory, and a new committee was established to handle complaints of discrimination and bias. Principal Reed publicly addressed the student body, acknowledging the school's shortcomings and pledging to create a more inclusive environment. But change wasn't immediate or easy. Some teachers remained skeptical, their biases lingering under the surface. Yet the power dynamics began to shift. Students felt emboldened by Jamal's actions, speaking out against unfair treatment and holding their educators accountable. The once muted whispers of dissent had grown into a chorus of voices demanding respect and equality. Jamal's story didn't stop at the school's gates. The local journalist who first covered his experience published a follow-up piece, highlighting the impact of his fight for justice. The story reached regional news outlets, sparking debates about systemic racism in education and the need for reform. Jamal found himself invited to speak at community events, where he shared his journey and inspired others to stand up against injustice. At one such event, a woman approached him after his speech. She was a teacher from a neighboring school district, her eyes filled with tears. "Your story reminded me why I became a teacher," she said. "To uplift, not to tear down. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." Jamal was humbled by the support, but he never lost sight of his mission. He continued to advocate for equity in education, working with local organizations to push for broader policy changes. His parents stood by his side every step of the way, their pride evident in their unwavering support. Back at school, Jamal's relationships with his peers deepened. Even students who had previously stayed silent began to approach him, thanking him for giving them a voice. Malik and the rest of their friend group became more active in their advocacy, organizing workshops and events to educate their classmates about diversity and inclusion. One afternoon, as Jamal walked down the hallway, he noticed Ms. Carter. She hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Jamal," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I just want to apologize. I didn't realize how my actions came across, but I see it now, and I'm sorry." Jamal studied her for a moment, sensing the sincerity in her words. "Thank you," he replied. "I appreciate that. I hope we can all learn and grow from this." That moment symbolized the larger transformation taking place at Riverview High. The fight wasn't over, but the seeds of change had been planted. Jamal had not only stood up for himself, but had also paved the way for others to do the same. Years later, as Jamal looked back on his time at Riverview, he felt a deep sense of pride. The challenges he faced had shaped him into a leader and an advocate. His story became a testament to the power of resilience and the impact one voice can have in challenging the status quo. Jamal's journey wasn't just about confronting racist teachers. It was about rewriting the narrative, proving that even in the face of prejudice, strength and integrity could prevail.